Do you think that the big tech companies are in oligopoly territory now, that they are anti-competitive because they've just gotten so powerful?
So it's fair to say that Instagram and WhatsApp, when you refer to Facebook, give it a very unique and powerful oligopoly in and around social media for US-based and international markets. WhatsApp has almost 2 billion users, Instagram 1 billion users. It's safe to argue that those two acquisitions specifically give Facebook a huge strategic lead. And I think their influence and power in that market are critical. Senator Hawley points out fair concerns around that. I think it's ridiculous to make Facebook spin those businesses out. Mark bought those in 2012 and 2014, respectively. And those particular companies are strategically, critically important to the business. In fact, it might end up creating more shareholder value for those to be separate entities. But I believe that the strategic focus for Facebook continues to have those be a three-legged stool in their execution of a long-term strategy.
David, Facebook would argue not so. You can't just look at the U.S. or even U.S. and Europe. Look at China. Look at Tencent. Look at what we got to deal with competitively on a global scale. This is not as strong for us as it looks. What do you say?
Well, I think that will be their best argument. And as Mark Twain was fond of saying, don't let facts get in the way of a good story. In many respects, these large social media companies have become too big to succeed rather than too big to fail. Not so much as an economic engine, but as an instrument of indirect public policy and misuse and hackers and the like. And I think it's going to be very difficult for Facebook, in the wake of all of this pressure coming from Capitol Hill and in the wake of all of this pressure coming from state and local governments, to continue business as it was. And I think the greater issue for companies like Facebook, and ironically we saw it again just this week with WeWork, is the failure of corporate governance from the very early days of these businesses when they're private to when they're very, very large public companies. The boards of directors at these companies, in the case of Facebook, that serve at the pleasure of Mark Zuckerberg, are paid by Mark Zuckerberg and can be terminated by him, are essentially potted plants, and they're not able to provide the necessary corporate governance to make Facebook successful in an increasingly complicated political world.
Neil, the public markets have ratified it, right? They have told these companies, we are willing to tolerate it. The ownership structures, management structures, at least until this WeWork S-1 was filed.
Well, I think the public markets have actually reacted negatively to companies that have used cash as a moat. As an early stage venture firm, we tend to not love businesses that use cash as a moat. And what you saw with some of the struggles Uber and Lyft have had in the public markets, as well as the delay for the WeWork IPO, is that there's a fair amount of concern about businesses that don't have fundamental technology. If you look at Zoom and you look at Cloudflare or look at Datadog yesterday, these are businesses that got very far based on technology and a reasonable use of capital, and in many cases got close or near or into profitability. And that's what the public markets like to see, and as venture investors, that's what we like to see. And I think as you see IPOs coming for 2020, that'll continue to be a focus for public market investors as well as private market investors.
Okay, let's see. Let's move to IPOs too. Airbnb announcing it hopes to go public, as we mentioned, at some point in 2020. Goldman Sachs says this year so far is on track to be the worst year for IPO profits in more than 20. It's a tough environment to debut in at the moment, arguably, if you're an investor looking for profits. I wonder, Neil, part of this is biotech. I mean, there's been a lot of biotech startups coming to market. None of them are profitable. How big an issue is this really?
So I think that biotech is a very different business than most tech companies. You're exactly right, John. Many biotech companies come to market, and it's really a financing event. Often with the later stage private financing, tech companies come to market, and there's almost been an IPO before the public markets. And so once you reach public, it's liquidity for early investors in those businesses. So with biotech and tech, it's hard to compare the two because you're right, biotech tends to lose more. At my previous firm, we were lucky and are lucky to be invested in Airbnb. And what Brian and team have built is truly remarkable. It's a two-sided marketplace. He did it very capital efficiently and over time raised capital much later in the cycle after they'd already built a hugely sustainable business, 150 million listings, 5 million houses for rent. It's a very special business, and it's been profitable for multiple years, doing $1 billion a quarter in revenue. So when you see companies like that come public in 2020, it's something I think everyone in the ecosystem can get really excited about because those are real companies.
David, you would think if companies are staying private longer, they'd be more profitable by the time they came out. Is there some kind of contradiction here?
There's certainly a contradiction, and you would think that. And the real issue has been there has been so much liquidity available to private companies. Essentially, equity has been free for a very long time, and there's been no need to go public. You know, we talk about IPOs as the be-all, end-all. For guys like Neil and myself, early-stage investors, talking about IPOs is a little like talking about the quality of air on top of Mount Everest. It matters to a very, very, very few number of people because most people aren't going to be there. And most companies, most of the companies we back, will not find ultimate success in those public markets. But the amount of capital that's been available has kept them from any need to even try.